All right, welcome back to the Next Gen VC podcast, where we unpack the opportunities, challenges, and breakthroughs shaping life sciences investing and learn directly from the people who are building and backing the next generation of biotech companies. We are really pleased today to have as today's guest, Rich Gaster, who is managing partner at venBio. Rich has taken a pretty unconventional path into venture. He started as a surgeon scientist and engineer, earned his MD-PhD at Stanford, published and patented early in his career, and even founded a company while still in training. He moved into venture at Third Rock, helped build Pliant Therapeutics as part of the founding team, and then joined venBio, where he rose to become a managing partner. Along the way, he's been involved in building and investing in a wide range of companies and has helped shape venBio into one of the most focused and high conviction firms in biotech. More recently, Rich has also taken on a deeply personal role as an advocate in pediatric cancer, following his daughter Claire's diagnosis, and is now involved with the Pediatric Brain Tumor Foundation. In today's conversation, we'll cover a couple things: Rich's early path as a builder and founder, what he learned when he transitioned from an operator to an investor, how venBio approaches company investment differently from other firms, what led to his rapid rise within the firm, advice for the next generation of VCs, and we'll close out with his experience as parent and advocate. Rich, so good to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me and for putting on this podcast.
You bet. So let's start at the very beginning. I touched on this a little bit in the intro, but we discussed that you have somewhat an unconventional path into venture, being a surgeon, a founder of a company and stuff like that. Maybe talk a little bit about some of the things you did early in your career that may have led you into venture.
Yeah, so definitely had a winding path. I mean, I started out liking to, excited to build things with my hands, and so started out in engineering. Had parents that were physicians and always advocating for that, so kind of always kept a lens for medicine. And so when it came to deciding between getting a PhD in engineering or go to medical school, decided to do both so I could punt on the decision. So yeah, just did MD PhD at Stanford. My PhD was actually in an engineering lab. The lab itself was an electrical engineering lab with some material science, and then pivoted the application to medicine. So there was some nice overlap between the two. And then after or in the middle of residency, got to know Third Rock Ventures, and that's how I ultimately transitioned from medical practice to venture capital. But it was an unexpected introduction to the industry.
I'm laughing because my dad is a doctor, and I immediately knew as a young kid to never say that I was going to be a doctor because I feel like I couldn't change my mind after that. So
Yeah.
your answer is all of the above. I'm just going to do all of it. My answer is
Yeah.
reject.
So you actually practice surgery, right, Rich?
So yeah, I was in the Harvard reconstructive plastic surgery program. So we were doing face transplants, hand transplants. It was like a really awesome educational experience. But what I will say is, like, the first couple times you do these surgeries, it's like the coolest thing in the world and big impact on patients. But I also felt like doing that for 50 years at the end of the day might be less creative than what I wanted to do. And so during my training, got to know the Third Rock Ventures guys. Some of the guys had been physicians that left medicine to go into venture and biotech. Um, you know, the model that they pitched to me was pretty awesome, where it's sort of like it actually wasn't venture capital. It was like, do you want to be an entrepreneur? And by the way, we have a venture fund to back your ideas. And so, it's sort of like a risk free or less risky way of going into entrepreneurship. So yeah, left medicine, joined Third Rock, and it was a cool model where you could kind of sit and ideate with some of the smartest people in the world in drug development. And one of the companies that came out of that was Pliant, which is a fibrosis company. And actually, you take a step back in plastic surgery, one of the big questions or challenges is wound healing. Aberrant wound healing is fibrosis of the skin. But as it relates to Pliant, we were focused on fibrosis of the lung and the liver. But the overall dysregulated pathways involving TGF beta were overlapping, whether it was skin, lung, et cetera.
tell us a little bit about how Pliant came about. Was it part of the ideation process at Third Rock? And what was your role in coming up with Pliant?
So one of the goals was let's build a fibrosis company, period. Go look at all the most interesting science out there. What are the best pathways to consider targeting? And there was a lab out of UCSF, Dean Shepard and Hal Chapman, that had been working together to elucidate, a mechanism of alpha V beta 6 and an integrin that activates TGF beta. If you inhibit TGF beta systemically, there's tox, but in fibrosis, you have upregulation of alpha V beta 6 in the lung alveolar epithelial cells. So you have a selective way of preventing TGF beta activation. And so, we looked at a bunch of different approaches, but we felt like this was sort of the most interesting one. Also, in the cholangiocyte, when you have fibrosis of certain liver diseases, the cholangiocyte itself upregulates alpha V beta 6. So if you look for it in healthy tissue, it's absent. It's only upregulated in diseased tissue and activates TGF beta. So it was sort of a disease specific way of targeting TGF beta activation.
So, did you, because of your plastic surgery background, go in thinking, okay, I have some knowledge around fibrosis, and so I want to leverage my past experience? Or was it that you came in to Third Rock and said, okay, I can think about anything, and you started looking at a bunch of things, and then it came back to, oh, actually, this is really interesting?
Yeah. So I went in with obviously an open mind and wanted to see all the cool opportunities to go after, but had a foundational knowledge that made it easier to go into sort of that disease biology. One thing that's interesting is like a PhD training is very different than a medical school training. Medical school training, you learn all the different areas of medicine. And in a PhD, you go super deep in one specific area of science. And so here, I felt like I had a level of depth. I had sort of breadth to look at the various things they were working on, but depth already here that I could then leverage to go deeper faster. It enabled us to for me to get up to speed quicker.
And how much do you think your PhD or your MD has influenced your career overall? Like, what have there been
Yeah,
times where you lean more into your PhD training and there's times that you lean more into your MD training?
definitely. So as it relates to like looking at a new therapeutic area, having the MD background just makes it easy to get up to speed quickly because someone might pitch a rare genetic disease that a pure PhD might not be aware of, and we might have some foundational knowledge. But on the PhD side, when it comes to like really deep technical diligence, especially on a preclinical stage asset, I might be familiar with the assays that they're using, be able to probe further, be able to point out holes in the way they conducted their study, the way they set it up might be just wrong or misleading. Like with integrins, for example, the activity of the integrin highly depends on the level of cation in the assay. And so, if you hadn't done basic science research, you might not even know to be asked the question that maybe the assay they've done is contrived. So I think both can be very helpful.
And how about your engineering background? Like, do you recommend more VCs have engineering backgrounds and go
But
into that?
that's less relevant. It's funny. One of the guys at Burnt Rock, when I interviewed, wanted to kind of pressure me, and he said, "So your background is in engineering and plastic surgery. Neither of those have anything to do with drug development. What are you doing here?" And it was sort of like a provocative intro, and and it's kind of true. It's not as relevant. Back in the day, when I was during my PhD, started two device companies that are completely separate from what I do today.
Is that where you got your Forbes 30 under 30, or was
Yeah,
that something else?
I got that because I started a company that was developing an HIV/AIDS diagnostic for battery powered technology that you could effectively used in sub-Saharan Africa. At the time, Gates Foundation was dedicated to treating all patients diagnosed with AIDS, but like not a lot of patients, you didn't have access to the diagnostic tools. So we had a cool technology that we developed. Um, but yeah, but so back to your question on engineering, like maybe it's a way of thinking rather than like hands-on help today.
I do notice that there's certain things that are in my background as a scientist and engineer that I assume that other people know. And then I realized I think that actually came from my science engineering training, such as like Excel and PowerPoint and just like the way of thinking. And I'll be talking to one of my associates and be like, how come you don't know how to do this? And I realize, oh wait, they just don't have the same background. So anyways, it's
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah,
Mhm.
especially modeling things out.
Yeah.
It's a different way of thinking. Yeah.
So, Rich, you touched on the fact that you started two companies when you were in your MD-PhD program or around that time period. And then you started up a company when you entered Third Rock, Pliant Therapeutics. It's going to be an easy answer, probably. But what's it like starting up a company outside of a venture fund and within a venture fund?
Yeah, well, I would say raising money in grad school for these two companies was very, very challenging. We ultimately did, we got some grants and then some small seed funding, and then one of the companies is like a wearable electronic for pregnancy monitoring to diagnose labor and delivery, and that's actually the technology still being used today. But it was very tough, very nerve wracking. So going to Third Rock, the pitch of like not having to pitch to those darn VCs was very compelling. And now I am one of those. So definitely, yeah,
Does it
insightful.
give you a little bit of empathy when you see people trying to pitch and you think like, that was a young Rich Gaster. That could have been me trying to pitch that. Or how do you does it give you a
Yeah,
different perspective?
absolutely. I think one of the things that I'll try to do is if it's like definitely not a fit, I don't want to lead anybody on, and so I'll let them know right away if it's not a fit, and then why, so that it could be not a strategic fit for venBio or not interesting for a technical reason, and I'll try to be transparent. For friends of friends, I'll take calls and then have direct feedback for them if it's a mentorship type experience. And then, we only do really deep diligence with tons of detailed questions if it's like a very high conviction opportunity, because, you'll see other VCs, and, we saw this back when I was pitching. People will do diligence just for the sake of like learning. And that's just a waste of everybody's time. Uh,
How interesting.
Give me a sense of the scale, like Third Rock, like how many entrepreneurs are you talking to in a, I don't know, month or year? I don't know what's the better number to use. And then how many
yeah.
go into
I
the
mean, so
fund?
back in that build phase, we probably spoke to a dozen different, well, we've read papers on hundreds of people, and then do real deep diligence on probably about a dozen different approaches to this is for the fibrosis company, to then pick the one or two best ones. We actually back in the day were trying to combine two different approaches into one company, but then got bid in one of the approaches by a competing fund. So there's you trying to pick the best assets out there, but then also the competitive landscape of others trying to pick the best assets out there. Third Rock's evolved their model over time, but back when I was there, the Series A was like 100% Third Rock. You kind of heads down, you do a 50 million Series A. It's all Third Rock all the time. Now they're starting to syndicate more in the Series A's, so it's slightly different today.
So what
Can we
prompted your move then to venBio after Third Rock? I mean, it's venBio seems like a very different venture fund in many ways from Third Rock. Maybe talk about what prompted that move and some of the things that you see, di- just contrast between the two firms.
Yeah, so Third Rock was focused on, when you're inside, you're like working on one or two or maybe three company builds, and you're all in on those few opportunities. And once it gets out there, the interesting and exciting aspect and why I wanted to join was you then get operating experience. So you build internally, you then go out to the mothership, get operating experience, go back. Hopefully you get, every time you launch a new company, you get increasing level of responsibility. So you get, to effectively ultimately be a CEO of a ads company. And a good friend of mine has done that. He's kind of iterated over and over again, and now is the CEO. That's Eric Green, who's the CEO of Trace. Just a phenomenal person at Stanford, MD-PhD, did residency in Boston. and cardiology, and then now has been a successful serial entrepreneur all the way up. Um, the model
Yeah. Let me just chime in there and make a little plug. We did
yeah,
interview Doreen Rusi at Third Rock, who also we talked about at Trace.
nice. But he's like the poster child of like what to do. Like you just start in junior and like build a company, build more, get more experience, etc. And that's what my ultimate goal was joining Third Rock. And then I got to know the venBio guys, and the venBio model was different, but also very interesting. Where we're not building every single company from scratch, but we're actively involved in every company, and so we always lead or co-lead. We always take a board seat, but we're working on more companies at a time. And I really liked that model because once you go into a company, you're 100% in that one company, and you might have, the goal might be to do that for 2 or 3 years. And while that's nice, I kind of like the ability to be diverse and dynamic every year of my career. And so when I joined venBio, it was a very small team. There were just a handful of investment professionals. We have five right now. We can put real dollars to work. So, each fund right now is around 500 million. The goal is to make about 12 investments per fund. We invest over 3 years. And so that's like 4 new deals a year. It's a very manageable number of deals per year. And, we write 30 plus or minus $1 million checks in the first round, have 50 to 60 million reserved per company. So we're still like all in on a certain number of deals, but it's a little bit, there's a little bit more breadth. Both are successful models, just different.
Interesting.
At what point did you realize that the kind of model of the VC is really important to like where you want to spend your time? Um,
So yeah, actually, so being part of the management team at Pliant, I got to see the interaction between the management team and the board. And the board is very helpful to help guide kind of the goals of the company. And when I saw that, I was like, I would like to be part of the board where I'm strategic, but not actually doing the day to day. The day to day is really hard, and the strategic insight is very creative and thoughtful and hopefully helpful. But kind of wanted to be able to do that on a broader scale.
should we talk about one of your portfolio companies at venBio, maybe like 35 Pharma, and how that's been different um, working at venBio versus your Third Rock and Pliant relationship?
Sure. Yeah. So 35 Pharma was yeah, a very exciting venBio company build. The difference between 35 and some of the traditional Third Rock companies is it's an asset focused investment. This isn't a big platform that's going to be churning out tons and tons of new medicines. It's validated biology, best in class approach, asset focused. That's sort of the venBio model. We're really asset driven, and I think the timeline to value creation can be faster, and the dollars invested can be fewer to get there. And so actually the CEO is a CEO we got to know from his prior company. So, the CEO of 35 is a guy named Ilya Takimirov. He was developing a company called Forbius, which actually was a TGF beta trap. Goes back to sort of the biology on the Pliant side, where they had some great, interesting clinical data. We actually submitted a term sheet, but then they sold the company to BMS. And when he was building his new company, which was 35, developing an activin receptor trap, got to know him from the past. He came to us, I think, first, and we decided to go all in, just venBio in the Series A, build out the sort of company story and strategy, and then brought in some key investor friends into the Series B at a nice step up. That we brought in some more friends after they generate some more clinical data in the Series C at another nice step up, and then ultimately recently sold the company to GSK. And it was a very nice return for venBio, and I think all of the shareholders that have sequentially come in to join us.
You've had a pretty
Awesome.
good couple months, if I recall, Rich.
Yeah.
Impressive track record. Maybe give us a little bit of a download of that.
Yeah, sure. So, Akera was a company where we worked collaboratively with others to do the Series A build. That was ultimately acquired in December. And then Ventix is a company where we did the Series A build with others, and that was acquired in January. And then 35 was acquired in February. So we've had three sort of back to back to back venBio company builds from the Series A all the way through acquisition recently. So feeling very lucky.
Time to refill that pipeline.
Yes, exactly. And we have Wilson doing diligence on two very exciting opportunities right now on the IP front. But thank
Well,
you.
thanks, Rich. So, tell us a little bit about the venBio team. It's a very small team. What are some of the advantages of having such a small team uh, at
Yeah,
venBio?
it's a one of the things that really attracted me to venBio was the small team. I mean, it's sort of like a family environment. Together we sit and chat about every single deal, so everyone knows what is going on every single deal. There were four of us on the investment side. We just made a junior analyst hire last year, so now there's five. But back when there were four of us, it would be two. We'd break up into teams of two, so two would work on a deal at any one given time, and the other, two would be updated every week. And when it comes time to making a decision, of, like, whether or not we should pull the trigger and make an investment, there's no sort of ambiguity. It's not like you're going to an investment committee for the first time and hoping your deal gets approved, and with 50 investment professionals and not knowing what's going on. We know every detail of every deal, and so by the time it comes, you know, time to submit a term sheet, all the key questions have been answered, and it's more, just perfunctory discussion.
Is it the battle of the deals, or is it more like each deal is examined on its own merits? When you only
Sorry,
can
what do you mean by the battle? Yes.
like are people coming in and it's like, okay, we can either do this deal or this deal. When you only have,
Oh,
4
I see.
to 5
Um,
deals a year, right? Like, do you feel like it's competitive, or is it more just like you have an underlying thesis on something and you're just kind of running it to ground and assuming everything checks a box and let's
yeah, it's
go.
a good question. So, our, like, number of deals per year is sort of a target average, but if for whatever reason there's a bunch of great deals and we deploy faster, that's totally fine. So it's not like, one deal then sacrifices another deal. But because we're trying to do, a few number of deals per year, it's a very, very high bar. Aaron, Corey, and I are on the investment committee, and so legally, like, I guess 2 out of 3 make a decision to do a deal, but practically it's always unanimous. There's no ambiguity. We want everyone to be supported by every deal. We have the luxury of doing that because we only want to do a few deals a year, so just the creme de la creme deals make it through.
Yeah, and you have a good track record. So there might be some FOMO, right? Missing out on some deals, but the ones you do back are showing that you've backed great companies so far, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's definitely companies that we have passed on that we've regretted, but I'd much rather regret on passing than regret on doing a deal than you lose your.
Well said. From the outsider's perspective, Rich, it seemed that you rose very rapidly within venBio. You started as a principal, I believe.
Actually, at one level below, I was a vice president, and then
So
yeah,
you started venBio as a vice president and then rapidly became managing partner. Did that feel rapid to you internally, or did it just seem like a natural progression?
yeah. So what I'm saying is, it practically speaking is probably I did have a rapid transition across roles, with increasing responsibility. But it felt natural. And I think the reason is we have a very small team. And when you have a small team, it gives you the ability to get credit, I guess, for doing good work and finding good deals and leading and there were just four of us. And so it made it pretty transparent. What I would also say is, Corey and Rob, as founding partners of venBio, gave me the ability to, work on deals and gave me autonomy. You know, Aaron obviously helped recruit me. He joined a little bit before I did. Together we worked collaboratively on a bunch of deals, and through the process, have become really great friends. And now Corey, Aaron, and I are managing partners as Rob has sort of stepped down.
Do you remember the day, or was it a day, or that, or the like they Corey sort of, you felt like Corey was treating you as a peer, as opposed to someone who reported to him?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And actually, in medicine, they tell you don't become an attending where you train because you will always be treated like a student. And that's actually why I went to Boston. I wanted to be faculty at Stanford. So I did, residency in Boston to come back to hopefully be faculty there. But so what I'll say is when I started, they said, so I applied from third. I actually got to know Aaron. He's the one who kind of recruited me. They said, you can't be a principal because to be a principal, you have to know how to do deals. So you have to start as a vice president. And I was like, well, I was already a senior associate at Third Rock. So they're like, you have to be at a vice president and like learn how to lead a deal. Because at Third Rock, it's all kind of preformed, prefabricated. The deal structures, they were all the same back then. Now it's different. So started out as a vice president, just kind of watching, learning, sitting. And then found some deals that I thought were really interesting and really pounded the pavement. And to their credit, they let me get very involved from early days. And I guess a couple years in, that transition naturally happened from, student to peer. But I don't think I could put my finger on when that happened. But now, it's great. Like because we're so small, Aaron and I and Corey, we all chat all the time about deals and socially. And so there's just this constant equal dialogue of opportunities.
That's excellent.
From the outside, does somebody distinguish if they're an entrepreneur? How do they know who to approach? Does it matter, or do you guys how do you guys
I would
organize
say,
who you lead?
yeah. So oftentimes it's based on our network. So we don't break down into therapeutic area or modality. Some groups do have like certain areas of focus. For us, we feel like, we have the capabilities to dig in and become experts in any specific area because we take the time to really go deep. But it all depends on sort of the personal network. So if someone approaches me for a deal, then I might lead it. If someone approaches Aaron, he might lead it, et cetera. There are certain areas where we've spent a lot more time than others. So like the fibrosis deals tend to come my way.
But you guys wouldn't judge somebody who has like a fibrosis company who would approach Aaron, for example,
Not
or
at all.
Core.
No.
Okay.
If they're
Yeah.
friends with him, they go to him. That's totally normal and expected. One of the advantages to venBio always taking a board seat and leading deals, we get to know operators very, very well. And so, when there is an exit, we hope and expect that the relationship was very positive and they'll come back to us in the next deal and the next deal. And so, like, for example, if Aaron was on a board with a CEO that had an exit and the new co is in fibrosis, they're going to go to Aaron over me.
So one of the things we do on our show, Rich, is uh, have provide advice to people that are thinking about entering into biotech investing. Um, what would you, looking now, if a young Rich Gaster approaches you and say, "Hey, what should I be doing to get into biotech investing?" What advice would you give him?
Yeah. One thing that find very helpful is staying up to speed on all of the biotech news. And so, follow the public companies in the space, follow the setups going into data readouts, try to come up with what you think is going to be a positive or negative data readout and think about, what the market reaction is going to be. There's a lot of rich information out there that helps inform on the private side, on the public side. And so there's a bunch of different, news services that you could subscribe to kind of flag those and read up on it. And I think that's like really helpful education. And then taking a step back, historically, I used to tell everyone to either get an MD or PhD so that you can have sort of foundational knowledge base. The reason why I say historically is the analyst that we just hired, Parthan Patel, it's like, he's fantastic. He came straight out of undergrad. He initially came to us and asked me for advice. And I was like, I'll chat with you, but my advice is go get a degree and then come back. We ended up putting him on a couple of projects, and he blew us away in like how good he was. So not necessary in that setting, but I guess highly encouraged to get. I will say, like, my medical school training, especially, is very helpful because when someone pitches a disease, I already know what the disease is and I know what the treatment landscape is, and it just gives me like a step up on day one. Um, so, but no one size fits all recommendation. He did do some internships with some peer funds that whipped him into shape. But yeah,
That's
Yeah, so
awesome.
basically be doing investing, like start thinking like
I
an
think
investor.
mentally doing the investing is the key. Exactly. So, like during your training, wherever it is, undergrad, grad, um, see the public companies, think about the data that readouts that are about to happen, try to predict if you think it's going to work or not, and then see if it does work or not. And sometimes it'll work, meaning stat sig, but the market, drops for whatever reason. There was a tolerability issue, or they didn't meet the clinically effective bogey, even it was stat sig. That can kind of hone your skills.
Rich, I mentioned this at the very beginning when we started as part of my introduction, and that is about your daughter Claire and her battle and ultimate victory over pediatric brain cancer. Us a little bit about that, about Claire's diagnosis and how you and your wife dealt with it.
Yeah. So 2 years ago, March of 2024, our 2-year-old daughter at the time had a seizure. Brought her to the emergency room, and they did a CT scan, and they actually this was at a Stanford affiliated hospital. They didn't have a pediatric neurologist on staff, so they had to call Stanford. And the CT scan showed like a little ditzel, and the pediatric neurologist who was remote said, "Oh, she's an epilepsy expert." Said, "Your daughter has epilepsy. Follow up in my epilepsy clinic, and they'll get you in the next 1 to 3 months." I pushed back and I was like, I want to know in detail what this finding is on the CT scan. She needs to get an MRI with contrast. And they pushed back for a while. It said it refused to be discharged until we actually get the scan. And they transported her to Stanford. They said, "Fine, we'll do the MRI, but it's not urgent." So she got put on the wait list. A shoulder MRI that was scheduled got priority. She had to fast because she has to get anesthesia and to get the MRI because it's like a hour and a half sequence to do with and without contrast, brain, spinal cord. And every day she would beg to eat. We'd have to tell her, "No, you can't eat." Rationalizing with a 2-year-old is really tough. Finally, at the end of the third day, they do the scan, and it turns out, she had brain cancer with a necrotic center, highly aggressive tumor. I'm very impressed. The radiologist at Stanford predicted that it was this very rare tumor type called ATRT, which is a rhabdoid tumor of the brain. There's about 50 cases per year. But obviously, yeah, 2 years ago, our world was like turned upside down. Reached out to every single KOL I could find all over the world. Because it's rare, there's no sort of defined protocol. And so spoke UCSF had a protocol, Dana-Farber had a protocol, spoke to someone in Canada, spoke to someone, yeah, to 3 different people in Europe. And we ultimately, because there was no really defined protocol, worked collaboratively with our neuro-oncologist to come up with a very special treatment regimen for Claire. Um, that involved, surgery. Obviously, she did surgery right away. Luckily, I did my MD-PhD with one of the neurosurgeons on staff that connected us, and literally the next day they took the tumor out. But she did, systemic chemo, intrathecal chemo, 3 stem cell transplants to kill every dividing cell that required stem cell rescue, and then ultimately proton beam radiation at MGH. So interesting. I did med school at Stanford, residency at MGH, and used our resources at both places to get her the best care. But her 2-year survival was 30%, and of the surviving kids, typically there's morbidity. She's now 2 years out and disease free and 100% back to normal. So we had a miserable year of 2024, but feeling lucky now where she is.
Amazing story.
It's an amazing story.
Um, one thing that struck me is that you really use all the resources that you had, but you're also unlike a lot of other people in the world who don't have access, whether from a knowledge standpoint or from knowing the surgeons who are performing this, to even being able to walk in and say, "Yeah, I have the credentials." Can you talk a little bit about that? And like,
Yeah, what I will say is every step of the way was a battle.
so you didn't just like flash your MD-PhD or say, "Hey, I did my
I couldn't get
residency
her
here."
MRI. I mean, I'm like, I'm like, I have a 2-year-old with maybe brain cancer, and you won't give me an MRI. It was like, and that was just one out of like 1,000 different battles. And I had, to your point, I had a network. I had knowledge and a network that I tried to use everything at my disposal to get. But when it came to, so our neuro-oncologist that we worked with, she was very open to, working collaboratively, partly because, again, because the tumor type was rare, there's no really like set formal protocol. And so like one of the questions is like, what's the IC50 of the ATRT tumor cells to each of these chemotherapeutic agents? And the reality is, like, as a physician, you don't really know that. The protocols are defined by that. And then, we're giving huge doses of systemic chemo, hoping it gets in. Well, what's the degree of into the brain? What's the degree of blood-brain barrier crossing? We actually ended up putting in a port that delivers chemo directly into her brain called a RICM. A more common name is OMI, but she specifically got a RICM. And, we could then measure, you could know exactly what the drug levels were. This is like a level of, sophistication that isn't typically done in medicine because it's just not how medicine is practiced. That's how like
Probably not offered,
protocols.
and people don't know how to ask for it, right?
Yeah. And so um, there were definitely challenges that we had to overcome to like sort of fight for what we felt like was the best treatment for her. Even things like, when she got the stem cell transplants, there are certain medications that can help rescue the bone marrow. And, pointed to some literature of the way other sites do things to sort of get your neutrophils back. So after you have bone marrow ablation, there's a window where you have no immune protection. And if you get a fever, it's called febrile neutropenia. And you basically have potentially an infection brewing and no immune system to kill it. And you're just like begging every day that the neutrophils come back. And there's approaches that get you your neutrophils back sooner, but Stanford didn't do it, and it was a huge battle. And so like her first cycle of stem cell transplant, they refused to do it. Second, they refused to do it. Finally, on the third, they agreed to do it, and her stems and her neutrophils came back much faster. And so, definitely frustrating set of experiences, but also a motivation for me to, as you alluded to, Mike, to join the Pediatric Brain Tumor Foundation. This is a group that has many different arms that one relates to, family advocacy. The other is advocacy up in Washington. The other is research, where I'm going to be focusing time. Another is an AI based chatbot to help families connect with clinical trials if necessary, and also answer questions in their time of need. And so felt like that was a very meaningful way to help other families to Jen, your question on like, I definitely had access to more than the average family. I want to make sure that we other families will be empowered as well
That they know which questions to ask, to to
and
press.
know what to fight for. It's easy to sit back and be like, oh, this is the way it's done. But sometimes the way it's done is good on average, but not necessarily for your specific kid.
You sort of tell us a little bit about maybe how the system didn't work. Did it work? Was there aspects of the system that did work, Rich, or is it a little less?
It's easy to complain. Yeah, it definitely like, on Yelp, it's more likely that you're going to write a negative review than a positive one. Uh, yeah, I mean,
I would
there,
imagine like the
so
nursing staff and we're
the
very
nursing
caring.
staff is fantastic, in general. Although like, I got in trouble because, you're supposed to measure vitals every, 4 hours, depending on how sick the kid is. And my daughter, everyone that would come in would like stab her. They stabbed her in the head for chemo. They draw, blood. Like it's always there was always a negative experience. And so I was like, can I do the vitals for my daughter? Like, you put on a blood pressure cuff. I'm a physician. You put on a blood pressure cuff. You put on a pulse ox. You measure their temperature. Um, and they let me do that for a while. And then when the the head of the nursing staff found out that the patient's dad was measuring vitals, that was a big no no and a big lecture that, I'm not trained to do that. And so then you've got a stranger coming in, waking up your kid, just to measure the blood pressure so I don't know. I could go on and on of like frustrations. I'll give you another child. When she was getting her stem cell harvest. So to get stem cell rescue, you need to harvest the stem cells. They put in a giant catheter in her neck, a huge fat catheter to just slowly pull out the stem cells so that there's no shear. It's a very delicate procedure. In the middle of the stem cell harvest, the machine broke. The error code is literally going off, and the person in the room calls some central lab that says like error code 537 is going off. What do I do? And and they're on speakerphone. Person on the other line says, turn it off and turn it back on again. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like this is what my daughter's blood is half out in this machine filled to harvesting her stem cells. And you're telling me like this is like an iPhone reset. Um so we like Googled the like manual
Scary as that.
of
Wow.
what we Googled the manual of like this machine of what the error code means, and it means like the tubing like fell out of the pump, and it's just like
No
just
way. You
redo the
did.
tubing, like open, so there were just so many frustrating experiences.
You needed to solve the error code on your own by Googling what the error code means.
We found the manual based on the machine and the error code of like what the error code means. And the person, this doesn't reflect Stanford medicine. Like this is like a technician sitting by a machine. So I don't mean, but like, we just have so many challenging experiences. One area, I mean, Stanford, what's phenomenal about Stanford is like everyone there is super smart and super talented. The neurosurgery team is great. The neuro-oncology team was great. I had my battles with the stem cell transplant team, but you know, the integration and intelligence there is like top notch.
I love how you're giving back though to the pediatric brain tumor community by joining this foundation and really helping, educate people about your story. Probably isn't easy to tell the story, I would imagine, but I really appreciate you doing that.
Yes, of course. And one thing that we're doing now is we're doing a little fundraiser to help support the PBTF. There's so many very compelling causes that maybe we can include in the comments section a link to the website, because the most common cause of pediatric cancer death is brain cancer. But it's only a tiny fraction of funding, and the funding obviously gets cut from the government. So the PBTF is an area that I think can really help, families in need advance the science, advance medicine, and hopefully, you know, make make the experience for future families easier.
Rich, thanks very much. We strongly encourage people to think about donating to the Pediatric Brain Tumor Foundation, and we'll provide information on where to donate in the description part of our podcast. Maybe taking it back a little bit to the human element, Rich, how did you deal with being a high power VC and your daughter helping your daughter and your family and your wife through this whole time? It must have been really rough.
It was tough. We spent a little over 100 nights in the hospital. My wife and I tended to break it up where I would be in the hospital with her for a week, and then my wife would be for a week. So we'd alternate back and forth. We also have a 7-year-old son. So one of us was with him, the other one was with Claire in the hospital. Then when we went to Boston for 6 weeks for proton beam radiation, then we were even further apart. But it was tough. There were many times where Claire was like really, really sick and really, really tired and sleeping a lot. So, when I was in the hospital, I was actually able to get to get work done. And then my wife actually, quit her job so that she could, be there to help support, as needed.
What struck me about the story is some of it is there are the therapies, but then you're also talking about the protocols, right? Does that change how you do investments in companies as well? Where you may have some of the tools, but so important to the outcome of the patient are these
Abs-
other things. Like you're talking about the neutrophils, right? Like how does
ab-
that impact how you work
yeah,
with companies? Yeah.
absolutely. Well, what I will say is being a parent and experiencing some of these side effects that you like read in like a table of like a clinical trial puts it into a whole new perspective. You know, so like as like an investor, you think of this AE as like, you know, on a scale of like
Grade one, two,
not so
three.
bad, yeah, not so bad, and then like horrible. And like febrile neutropenia, for example, it's just like a line item you want to avoid. But then being the parent, I now know like how terrifying that is. And then as it relates to the protocol, yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we try to do by sitting on boards of our companies is get involved in every single detail of a clinical trial design. And the clinical trial design, like to your point, the drug might work, but what might make or break your success is the clinical trial design. And so being hyper focused on that, I think is helpful, and I think it shed sort of a new light.
I want to go back to the PBTF, and I think it's fantastic. Like you just spent the last 2 years going through hell trying to balance work and being, you know, a parent, an advocate to a very sick kid. And that must have been challenging. I'm sure you didn't sleep much. And then now you're rolling right into committing to contributing to this foundation, right? And it's great that you're involved in the fundraiser. But what are some things that you wish your collaborators and other folks in VC or entrepreneurs might do beyond donating, and what do you think they might get out of it? Like what might getting involved with PBTF do for them in terms of how they approach their career? And maybe you can give us some parting thoughts on that.
Yeah, what's nice about the PBTF is it is a very multifaceted organization in terms of the overall approaches that they're trying to accomplish. And so there's actually many different ways you can get involved beyond just donating capital. When it comes to advocacy, for example, I think that's an incredibly helpful area to make sure that the government spends adequate resources on advancing treatments for pediatric brain cancer. One of the really sad parts about venture, I think we do an amazing job of like developing drugs for patients in need, but it has to be a market size large enough to warrant the investment. And so a rare pediatric brain cancer just doesn't meet the threshold for a traditional venture capital venture like return. And that's where, you know, raising money, whether it's PBTF or getting access to additional capital from the government to enable research and progress science is really helpful. And actually, PBTF has done that. They've got a couple examples of drugs that are now approved that they've financed from back in the beginning days that are now treatment options for kids with pediatric brain cancer. And then another area is this AI based chatbot that they're working on. Um, there's a lot of people that have skills that overlap with both sort of integration with electronic medical record systems so that we can learn from all of the data that's out there to then help understand what works, what doesn't work without having to wait for a specific academic at a specific site to publish is another area. And then, within, there's going to be a focus on putting together research consortiums to bring together KOLs. So actually within a year of Claire's diagnosis, we helped sponsor a ATRT and ETMR, two rare brain cancer consortium where we brought KOLs from all over the world. We flew them out, got an all-inclusive hotel in Mexico on the beach, and they talked about sort of their current day research and what they're seeing. So we don't have to wait 3 years for the publication to come out to know what's hot, what's the most successful treatment option. So those are a couple different avenues that could help support beyond just money.
Well,
That's
thanks.
awesome.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, thanks very much. Well, I just wanted to close this out by thanking you, Rich, for joining us today and sharing both your professional journey as well as your very moving personal perspective. I really appreciate that. Thanks for being a guest on our podcast.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Next Gen VC podcast. We are sponsored by Wilson Sonsini, the premier life sciences law firm. We're also sponsored by LaunchBio, a nonprofit organization that focuses on building better biotechs by creating connections between entrepreneurs and investors. Thanks to AJ Machado for engineering and producing today's podcast, and Steve Prutzman for providing our theme music, which comes from his Passengers album. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platforms. And finally, let's all do great work out there.
This episode may feature current or former clients of Wilson Sonsini. This podcast is for general informational purposes and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on as legal advice. The information in this podcast is not tailored to a particularized situation or jurisdiction, may not reflect the current state of the law, and should not be considered a substitute for the advice of your own legal counsel. You should not consider this podcast an invitation to form an attorney-client relationship, and no attorney-client relationship is created by your use of this podcast. Wilson Sonsini disclaims all liability in respect to any actions taken or not taken based on the content of this podcast, and notes that prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. This podcast may be considered attorney advertising in certain jurisdictions.